My name's Karen Lucas. I'm Professor of Transport and Social Analysis in the Institute for Transport Studies here at Leeds University, and I've just become one of the Deputy Directors for Leeds Social Sciences Institute, which I'm very pleased about. This is my first official duty for LSSI, and so I'm just going to do the very easy thing and give you some housekeeping rules. The fire exits are at the back of the room. You basically go down the stairs and congregate straight outside the building. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if one goes off, it's either an accident or we really do need to get out quite quickly. The main toilets are downstairs, but I think there is a disabled toilet here for people who need to stay on this floor, just around this corner. You'll hear from me later when I'm doing a bit more of my organisational duties, but for now I'll just introduce you straight away to Lisa Roberts, who's going to welcome you officially.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. As Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation here at the University of Leeds, delighted to welcome everyone to the University, for our external partners, and to the Leeds Social Sciences Institute Impact Acceleration Account Showcase event, which looks marvellous, I have to say. This event is a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the breadth and the depth of our social sciences research and our key partnerships, and particularly highlight the impact of the research that we do. Delighted to have our partners from other organisations here with us, and I hope that this afternoon the importance and the strength of the collaborative working that we have will be obvious to all. And I personally want to just take a moment to take the opportunity to say how incredibly valued and vital those external relationships are, particularly in the Leeds City Region. And they're vital to me personally in my role and the university as a whole in all that we do. And how much those relationships underpin our three core missions, really: education, research and knowledge exchange. So our university strategic plan clearly signals that the creation, dissemination and application of knowledge is at the heart of what we do. And our research and innovation strategic plan has three main goals, really: to enhance the quality, volume and, importantly for this afternoon, the impact of our research. At a university level, a greater emphasis on supporting impact-focused research is very clear in our delivery plan. And it's quite clear that impact is not something that's just an afterthought when we think about our research activities. It's not seen as an aside to some areas of our research. Impact should be, and absolutely is at Leeds, truly at the centre of the research that we conduct. And by impact, I mean impact in all of its forms, whether it's local, national or international. And at Leeds, we're committed to all forms of impact, whether they be economic, societal. Support for impact through our delivery plan has been boosted by the recruitment of a Dean for Research, Quality and Impact, who's here with us this afternoon. And I think, again, that's a clear sign of the importance of this aspect of our research to the institution. And through this appointment and through our plan, you will see more activities and initiatives in the coming year which celebrate, recognise and support impactful research. So look out for some of those. Interdisciplinarity is also a core strength at Leeds, and of course that's going to be celebrated this afternoon as well. We're very well known for the breadth and the depth of our research, but our uniqueness really lies in how we bring those disciplines together for maximum impact and innovation. The local and international challenges society faces can't be solved through the lens of a single discipline. Similarly, the recently published Government Industrial Strategy lays out grand challenge areas: AI, data economy, clean growth, future mobility and ageing society. All of those challenges demand interdisciplinary working and working in partnership with industry, public and third sector bodies. So having mechanisms to bring different people with different expertise and different organisations together is absolutely critical for us. And it's where leadership from vehicles like the Leeds Social Sciences Institute is really vital and evident and very much needed and valued by the university. Our other interdisciplinary themes and research platforms are also great ways to bring researchers and partners together to explore new ideas and to ensure that our research is translated to societal benefit. And again, I'm delighted through our plan that we've gained more support and resource to support those activities. And again, we have a Dean of Interdisciplinary Research, signalling the importance of this in our strategy. And we're particularly putting more support into activities that bring the different themes together to work on those complex and multifactorial issues faced by society, whether they be inequalities, ageing, sustainability, climate change, security. And in my mind, the social sciences should be a key part of every research programme we have that tackles those big issues. And so I really loudly applaud innovative projects where we've true co-production of ideas. And some of those you'll hear about later and are highlighted in the new Delivering Impact brochure from the LSSI that will be launched later as well. I've mentioned partnership several times, and again our new strategy highlights the development and enhancement of partnerships as a key pillar of the plan. And again, you'll start to see a pattern here. We've brought in more leadership capacity to lead partnership activity, to nurture and grow new partnerships. And we've got some exciting and new and potentially impactful work going on with our Leeds City Region partners, which hopefully I can tell you more about in the coming months. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm hoping I'm signaling to you that partnership, interdisciplinarity and impact are key pillars of our research strategy as an organisation. And additional support and resource for all of those elements is there to ensure, at the end of the day, that I support great people with great ideas to deliver, which is why you're all here. The projects you'll hear more about this afternoon have been supported through the LSSI Impact Acceleration Account, which maximises the impact and influence of social science research with our non-academic partners. And the budget's used to support high-quality projects developed by our social science researchers through an open competition. And there are three strands of activity that are supported. Cross-disciplinary projects that demonstrate strong user engagement, knowledge exchange fellowships to enable movements of people between the university and partner organisations, and postgraduate research placements to enable exchange as well. And again, you'll hear about some of those excellent projects and activities this afternoon. I'm gutted that I can't stay for the whole afternoon. I now have to go and do something else for Grand Challenge Research Fund schemes, another good example of interdisciplinarity and impact. But I just want to take really the opportunity to thank everyone involved in the LSSI for the strong leadership that you show and for the strong engagement of many, both within and out with the university. This afternoon really celebrates your work, and I want to congratulate you on your achievements to date and to just urge you to keep up the great work and keep up the ambition. And if I can help in any way, let me know. Enjoy the afternoon.
Hi, so this is the Great Hall of the University of Leeds, and it's one of my favourite places. I came here as an undergraduate in 1978, and the first thing you do when you arrive is you sit over there with your parents and you're listening to an open day speech. A bit later, the parents remain over there and you're in your glad rags getting your degree. And eventually, maybe you'll get a PhD or some other form of doctorate. Why am I telling you this? Because knowledge is my favourite word. Knowledge is a word which doesn't distinguish between its accumulation, its generation. It doesn't distinguish between teaching and research. It doesn't distinguish between academic knowledge or knowledge of society and knowledge of business. It doesn't distinguish between who's generating it. It doesn't distinguish between who's disseminating it. That might be students who are involved in the knowledge generation for their own purposes or with their lecturers. It may be PhD students at the leading cutting edge. It may be research teams from right across the university. Now, I think as Lisa indicated there, it's very difficult to think of a societal challenge, one of these grand challenges, that doesn't have important social science dimensions. Indeed, if it did, it wouldn't be a challenge to society. So social science and the theories and the knowledge that underpin that knowledge, the theories that underpin it, need to be part of that. And if we as a university do that in isolation, if we don't do it with our students, with our researchers, with our teachers, with our partners, with our colleagues, with our understanding of knowledge, business knowledge, social knowledge in the region, or internationally as well for that matter, we're not going to get very far. Now, in one sense, I have responsibility for social sciences in the university on the university executive. I'm Dean of a Faculty of Social Science. But the guy who should really be here is called Adam Crawford. Adam is the director of Leeds Social Sciences Institute and a huge driving force. But he's wangled himself a few months in Australia, Sydney, would you believe, working on behalf of the Social Sciences Institute, because we have international partners all the way around the world, and Adam is working with one of those at the moment. He's had the nous to appoint 2 deputies, one of whom you saw earlier was Karen, and the other is Adrian Favell, who probably wish they were in Australia, although, nice day, got the sun streaming in. What better place there is than Yorkshire, and perhaps what better place there is than Leeds to be. But he seems to prefer the 30 degrees and Sydney, but hey, that's his problem. Whether he's watching me on live streaming on the internet, I don't know. I sort of feel I ought to be able to introduce him here, but he's asleep. So that's not going to work. But that's the point. The point is Leeds Social Sciences Institute is all of the researchers and all of the research teams across the university collaborating together, not just with other social scientists, but with scientists, with engineers. If you build a bridge between, or across the Humber, for example, you build a bridge across the Humber, what do? You connect 2 communities, you create new links, transport links, commuting links, social links, you affect the socio-demographics of the area, you affect the employment of the area. You haven't just built a bridge. And if we don't build social sciences into that concept, then that bridge will be somewhere that it's not needed or be too expensive. Well, the Humber Bridge wasn't a good example, was it? So the rest of this day is going to be focused on partnership, partnership around ideas, partnership around practice, partnership around policy. A bit of good news I have to tell you is that while we're looking backwards, i.e. celebrating, as Lisa said, the partnerships we currently have and the ideas we're currently working on together, this morning, and that's this morning Australian time, by the way, so I should say that the Impact Acceleration Account is funded by the University and ESRC together. That's the Economic and Social Research Council. Well, this morning in Australian time, we got a note saying we just got another £100,000 from the Economic and Social Research Council to develop further partnerships with business around knowledge exchange. And a second email which said we got another £30,000 to develop non-governmental international partnerships. So this day isn't just about celebrating the past. It's not about celebrating what you're doing. It's about looking for new ideas, new partnerships, new opportunities, and new ways forward to improve business and society in the region that we all live in. So as Lisa says, let's hope it's a productive and enjoyable day. And I think I'm possibly, Karen, handing back to you now, am I? Yeah, okay, thank you.
So thanks very much for that, Jeremy. So what we're going to do now is present to you 3 of our showcases of these impact acceleration projects. And they range across a number of different areas. So the first one is with the Sustainability Research Institute here at Leeds and Leeds City Council, and looks at something that's called the Leeds Climate Commission. The second one is a project that has worked with animators to safeguard messages for children, to produce safeguarding messages for children around their protection and with parents. And the third one worked with the Petitions Committee to look at ways in which that they could collaborate further in that respect. So I'm going to let the project partners explain their own projects to you. And then after that, we're going to have a series of more interactive sessions where we'll be working collaboratively together around the tables, hence the layout. So we won't bore you all with presentations too much, but an opportunity now for us to showcase some of these best examples. Thanks very much. So first, Andy Goulson and Tom Nolan from Leeds City Council. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, good afternoon, sorry. My name's Andy Goulson. I'm Professor of Environmental Policy here and Dean for Interdisciplinary Research. And this is my colleague Tom Nolan, who we work very closely together on the Leeds Climate Commission, which is what we're going to present to you today. To contextualise this in terms of social sciences, one of the biggest themes in the social sciences in the last 10 or 20 years has been around reimagining the relationship between government, business and society. And if there is a clear distinction between these actors, then many people think it's being blurred and that government is engaging with business and society in new ways, that businesses and society are having to do new things in new ways, and that this kind of reconfiguration or tectonic shift in the way that we operate as a society is one of the kind of defining things in the social sciences. What we're going to talk about today is an example to try and grapple with that, I suppose, on a city-level scale. Where we've set up the Leeds Climate Commission as an attempt to draw together public, private, third sector actors from across the city and develop a new capability to enable us to tackle the challenge of climate change here in Leeds. So Tom's going to introduce the Commission and explain what it does, and then I'm going to come back in at the end to kind of link it back into broader international research.
Thanks, Andy. Right, so as Andy said, I work for Leeds City Council, and I guess the starting point for this collaboration was the recognition in the Council that, firstly, tackling climate change is a really big issue, and a big issue for a local authority, especially when actually there's no statutory requirement for a local authority to address it. So it's something that the city wants to do, but doesn't have to do, but wants to do it well. And then secondly, in Leeds, we're blessed to have one, or if not two, both of the main universities in the city having real centres and areas of expertise around the issue of climate change. So recognising that this is an issue that's too big just for the local authority to address by itself, but that we've got some real expertise in the city, what better way to try and move forward than through an effective collaboration. And we took inspiration, if you like, from the National Committee on Climate Change, which is there to advise the government on how to meet its climate change targets required through the Climate Change Act. And so the Climate Commission, if you like, is a sort of an independent voice in the city, advising the city, not just the City Council, but all players in the city on what we need to do to address climate change. So we established the Commission. It was formally launched last September. And as Andy said, we've got representation from across the city on it, both universities, private sector players, the City Council, other public sector organisations, the NHS and so forth, the Environment Agency, and many private organisations and the third sector as well. So recognising that actually, if we're going to move the needle on climate change, we're going to need everybody's help and assistance. Everybody has a role to play in this. The aims are ambitious, and in fact, we're pretty sure that this is one of the first times a city like Leeds has attempted to do this in the world. But we've got a wide range of ambitions there, so it's all about coming together, celebrating the success that there has been in the city, which we'll show you more of, supporting robust decision-making. Yes, ultimately, it'll be organisations like the Council that have to make decisions, but much better that those decisions are based on firm evidence, scientific evidence where possible, about what's the best thing to do. We want to be monitoring progress, so is the city on track to meet its climate change targets, or what else does it need to do? At the moment, we're still on track, but we're kind of doing the easy stuff at the moment. It's only going to get harder. And then an important thing, not just talking about carbon reduction, but also adapting to the inevitable climate change that is going to take place. So or starting with looking at climate mitigation, but then moving on to climate adaptation. So an ambitious set of priorities for the Commission to work on. And we've set up some hopefully fairly light touch. We're trying to keep the bureaucracy to an absolute minimum. We don't want to be wasting money on keeping systems and structures and organisations going. We want to be focusing on delivery. So we've got a strategy group that meets about 3 or 4 times a year to keep things on track. But the bulk of the work is done by 3 and then an extra 4th group working on issues in detail. And it's probably that 4th group, so the 3rd bullet point down there, project development and finance, that's probably going to be the most important group amongst that. So we know, and Andy will talk about, we know the research says there are cost and carbon effective opportunities out in there in the city that haven't yet been delivered. So there are some obstacles in the way. How do we identify and overcome those obstacles? We've also set up a thing called the Leeds Climate Forum, so that's about reaching out into the city. That's only met once so far, but reaching out to a broader set of stakeholders. And the whole process is linked back to the Council's own democratic processes. So, in fact, Andy had the privilege of coming to the Council's Executive Board in December to advise the Council on the progress that the Commission was making. And the Council has recognised that and wants to hear more. So the next annual report to the Council will be entirely written by the Climate Commission. I mentioned celebrating success. Leeds is a big city, so we often don't know what's going on across the city. But there are examples all around the city of interesting things, pioneering things that are being done by loads of different sectors all across the city. We've got those all on the website, and you can find out more about them there. I'll hand over to Andy at this point, because it's not just about Leeds. This is about looking beyond the city.
Thank you. So this research and this kind of engagement and impact activity grew out of ESRC-funded research through the ESRC Centre for Climate Change, Economics and Policy. Although it started here in Leeds, it's become much more international, and the impact agenda and the impact story of this work is very much ongoing. So as well as working here in Leeds, we actually rather serendipitously, as a part of doing this work for Leeds, realised that we had all of the data and the models in place to do it for everywhere in the UK. So we have published carbon accounts for every local authority across the UK, for every local enterprise partnership and so on. I think there are nearly 500 of these altogether. And as one simple measure of impact, we worked out that even conservatively that saved roughly 100 years of effort in local authorities just to have these carbon accounts and low carbon plans in place. We're also at the moment rewriting or writing the energy strategy for North Yorkshire and involved in the energy strategy for West Yorkshire. We are preparing a report for the Greater London Authority, discussing having similar commissions in Cambridge and elsewhere around the UK. So where we're hoping to take this is that this innovation, this initiative from Leeds is replicated and transferred to other cities across the UK to build their capability to deliver on something that clearly they need to act on, but as Tom said, they're not obliged to act on, and austerity has certainly bitten in many areas to reduce their capacity. So this innovation kind of helps us to respond to that. I suppose one of the quandaries with all of this is by innovating, by doing something different, are you enabling austerity to move along further? It's kind of big society in action, much as I hate to admit that. Internationally, there's also a lot of activity. So we have worked in many countries around the world. I got back from Norway last night, where Norwegian cities are planning to do something very similar for all 4 of their biggest cities. And we've worked in multiple contexts. So in a couple of weeks' time, we're off to Canada to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where we're speaking and presenting this work, and then launching a report for Calgary too, which has a very similar model. So the kind of international agenda, although there are differences obviously from place to place, this really does resonate with broader work. But bringing it right back to Leeds, I mean, it also resonates with other areas beyond the climate change area. I suppose we're hoping or would love to see and support the emergence of other commissions in other areas. And there have been conversations in areas such as food or culture or even health to say, well, you know, what are the benefits of a city coming together to act as a city rather than relying on the city council to deliver everything on our behalf? You know, how does that change the way that we take decisions? Who does that benefit? You know, how do we actually deliver new things in this alternative kind of governance setting, I suppose? So the broader research has that wider agenda, and going back to the research, clearly there's a lot of work there on political science and a wider range of social sciences, which both informs and can be informed by this kind of experience. So we're very grateful to the Impact Accelerator account for enabling this to happen. It was the kind of seed that grew into something much bigger. Yeah, we're very happy to take questions or comments on the work as we move forward. Thank you. So we had the idea a couple of years ago, I think. Tom and I have worked together quite a lot over recent years, and we're discussing this, but we thought the best way would be to hold an open conversation. So we actually held a dinner here at the university and had, I think, 25 of the key organisations from across the city and said, what do you think? Should we do this? If so, what form should it take? You know, what should the ambition be? How should we deliver it? And so on. And it was a pretty resounding yes from everybody, from the public, private and third sectors, that we needed to do this. So that happened in, when was it, June 2016, I think. We then spent a few months developing the ideas and beginning to formulate a structure. We then, you know, it's been done in a very co-produced way. And then formally it only launched last September. So we had a year's run where we set up the structures. We advertised and invited people to apply to become commissioners, basically. We had a lot of applications. Not every area that we wanted to see covered was actually covered by an application. So we did kind of go out and you know, conscript some people to be part of it. I think one of the big challenges we have now is to sustain it. You know, it's launched, it's had a high-profile launch. A lot of positive feedback from lots of other places. But the real hard work is in showing it's got longer-term value. And the big question that came back from the Commission is, okay, how do we finance major investments in the city? And that's what we're grappling with now. So in April, we have the National Green Finance Task Force and some large institutional investors coming to the city. And then we're planning a kind of mini course, I suppose, a cohort for 6 sessions over a year to develop the pipeline of projects that could be funded in the city, to link them to investors, to link them to the lawyers, to do the due diligence and risk assessment and so on. And, you know, the real effort, I think, is going to be improving that we can do something transformative in the city. That's the challenge. Just starting this has been, it's been challenging, but it's been, and great fun, but, you know, that's been the easy bit. I think it's now showing that it can actually do something significant.
I think Andy's covered that really well. Just to echo, I mean, addressing climate change, or indeed any of the other big challenges that face a city like Leeds, whether that's improving health, tackling worklessness, whatever, they are difficult problems. There's no point pretending this is easy. But I think everyone comes at it from that point of view, and that's partly what attracts people to it, that there is something, you know, it is a genuine challenge. So there's something in it for everyone. And Leeds is a big city, so again, there's plenty of opportunities, plenty of experimentation. But colleagues here from the local authority will recognise that within the council now, and it is partly driven by austerity, but also there is this willingness to reach out to our academic partners, to use Leeds. Okay, we haven't got lots of money, but we have got lots of opportunities, lots of assets, lots of challenges. So to use us as a kind of a research opportunity for yourselves. You know, if you can get something to work in Leeds, you can probably get it to go almost anywhere, particularly in maybe Western Europe. So I think the council wants to be a good research partner, especially when it results in something that makes a real difference in the city. As I said in my presentation, and Andy mentioned, I think the main thing is unlocking some of the opportunities that the research suggests that are there. I forget the exact figures, 200 million pounds worth of economically viable carbon reduction investment is possible in Leeds, but it's not happening. The council is doing some stuff, but we know there's plenty others in commercial sector and other sectors that could happen. If we can bring just a proportion of that investment in so that it makes a real difference, so something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. We know there are challenges for the organisations concerned, but that's going to be one of our main focus. So if we can, hopefully at the end of this finance and project sort of initiative that we'll be kicking off this year, if we can point to something at the end of that and said, well, that wouldn't have happened without the Commission getting involved, that I think would be a real indicator that we can make a difference. I think there will be other things as well. We're working particularly with third sector colleagues around climate change communication in the city, which again is another really tricky topic. But that will be another area. If we can come up with something that's evidence-based, that we know that it's effective and works, and it works for Leeds, then that would be another success.
So the 200 million number, that's the annual saving that could be realised in the city's energy bill from making cost-effective investments in the housing sector, in commercial buildings like this one, in transport and industry and so on. So, you know, when you look at what the city needs to do in order to deliver on its climate targets, like every city in the UK, you know, there are a multitude of different projects, and one of them would be an extensive retrofit of the housing stock. You know, we know that there is lots of poor quality housing in Leeds, in terms of energy efficiency at least. We know that there are tons of profitable opportunities which would also improve public health, create jobs, and improve amenity in the city and so on and so on. You know, but there's a major issue about how to fund an extensive programme like that. It would need investment into the hundreds of millions, and the Green Finance Task Force, which we're hoping to bring to Leeds in April and May, we hope would lead to a huge investment in a major programme such as that. And the opportunities are really significant. I think it's 4,400 jobs or years of employment that these things could create. So, you know, for us to show that we're successful, we want to deliver a major initiative that would retrofit, you know, tens of thousands of homes across the city, or improve energy efficiency in building stock, or enhance the transport system to improve air quality and public health as well. It's that kind of thing. For me, actually, though, there's a deeper aspect to this, which is, again, to link back to the social science. There's a lot of talk in social sciences about what Anthony Giddens calls it the runaway world. You know, the globalization and accelerated technological change and so on means that people often feel kind of out of control and just being swept along by these, you know, deep undercurrents of social change. One of the big aims, and why we called the website Can Do Cities, was to say to a city such as Leeds, you know, you don't have to just sit there and wait for it to happen to you. You can organise, you can get together and build your capacity to shape the future that you want for the city. And, you know, what I would love to see is that this is a catalyst for a broader range of initiatives that make the city much more vibrant, much more activated, much more energised, and able to say, you know, what kind of future do we want to have as a city in Leeds? You know, climate change is one aspect of that, but there are many, many others. And for the city to feel more confident, you know, in saying, you know, this is what we're going to do to shape and deliver what we want, rather than just sitting back and, you know, waiting for austerity or globalization or Brexit or whatever else to just impact on us in a rather resigned and weary way.
That's right. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be invited here today and to share in such a lovely event. As you know, I'm a lecturer in the School of Education and I work in childhood studies. I research with children, and simply put, this means that I'm interested in children's views, in particular on their family and personal relationships. So central to my work is an aim to hear from children their reflections, their evaluations of their relationships, and how they negotiate change and also difficulties in their relationships. Today I'm going to talk to you about two projects. The first was a project which I undertook before I came to Leeds, and the second is the project that was funded by the LSSI Impact Acceleration Account, which followed on from this first project. So the first project is called Keeping Each Other Safe, the second project is Keeping Each Other Safe using animations to teach children safeguarding strategies. This project involved a collaboration with an organisation who are based in Hertfordshire, So I'm really apologetic they can't be here with us today to talk more about their involvement in the project. But I'm going to talk you through it and some of the issues that surrounded the project and the collaboration too. So the first project, Keeping Each Other Safe, was a project that looked at the strategies that children have available to them to deal with difficult issues in their lives, difficult relational problems. And in particular, I was looking at very thorny issues of domestic abuse, sexual abuse, and also bullying in children's relationships. Given the sensitivity of these issues, especially domestic abuse and sexual abuse, I couldn't ask children, I couldn't talk to children aged 8 to 10 about any real-life experiences that they'd had of these problems. It wasn't sensitive to do so. Instead, I developed a set of stories or a set of vignettes, fictional stories and accounts about children, fictional children experiencing these problems. And I talked to children about what the children in the stories should do about the problems they had and who they should talk to. I also asked the children, what would you do? Who would you talk to if you were in this situation? Building on a body of research, my research finds that although this was based on hypothetical situations, children overall had a sense of being quite reluctant to disclose problems that they had. In particular, being worried about being listened to or people acting on the concerns that they had. And in particular, this meant that children often delay disclosing abuse or disclosing problems that they're experiencing. Children in my research, as in other research, also had a sense that there weren't many strategies that they had available to them. They had quite limited strategies for thinking about quite serious issues like abuse. And this was particularly the case if the abuser was someone who was well known to them or someone who was living in their family homes. So the children imagined that this would be really difficult. They also had a concern about not being believed, and this wasn't just in the case of abuse, it was also in the case of bullying and not having their concerns acted upon in a way that they would perhaps like. And lastly, children had very few ideas about who to tell, particularly if we're talking about abuse. So if the abuser is within the home or someone who's known to them, children didn't have many ideas for who else apart from a mum or a grandparent they might tell about issues that they were experiencing. So these findings inspired me to think about what it is that children need, what kind of resources do they need to support them in making a disclosure or talking about a problem to an adult, and what would boost their confidence in doing so. At this point, I was seeking out some professionals who might be interested in working with me in developing a set of resources. One of the things that I did was organise a knowledge exchange workshop in London. And through this workshop, I came into contact with Dave and Fiona, who work at Families Feeling Safe Protective Behaviours Services. They're based in Hertfordshire, and they're experts in working with professionals in safeguarding capacity. They train about 2,000 professionals a year, and they also work with vulnerable children and families, so people who are experiencing abuse in their everyday lives. When we came together, we decided that we were going to develop a set of animations. We thought this would be appropriate for a digital age. So we set about working on these animations, drawing on their protective behaviour strategies from their work, and also using the findings from my work and the vignettes and the stories that I've been using with the children. So our aims in doing this were to make sure that we could improve children's understandings of their right to be and to feel safe, and that we could encourage children to think beyond their relationship with their parent or grandparent and think about who else they could tell about a problem, including professionals who are working with them. And we also wanted to make some suggestions for the kinds of ways that children could talk to adults about a problem. Often children say they don't have the words or vocabulary to describe a problem and to ask for help. This is something we thought we could address in our animations. So the award that I received from the LSSI Impact Acceleration Account, it served to enable us to hire a professional animator who would work with us in developing a set of scripts for these animations. It also meant that we could work together face-to-face and via Skype at various stages during this animation development. And we were involved in each stage of the development. We wrote the scripts, we worked with the animator on choosing music and choosing characters, in all aspects of it. And I've documented this process, which was quite complicated and certainly new to me, in a glossy leaflet. And I've got a bunch of leaflets on the desk over there if anyone would like one. And the idea is that I would share this process with other researchers who might be interested in developing animations, albeit probably quite different ones from mine. And that's the leaflet that I produced. So I'm hoping now to show you the animation.
Yesterday at school, 2 children passed around a note about me. They took pictures of me and sent them to their friends. They didn't play with me or pick me for their team. Today, on my street, some children shouted bad names at me. They threw stones at me on my walk home. They pushed me and kicked me. Tomorrow, I don't know what they'll do to me. When these children behave like this, I feel sad and alone. I feel nervous and anxious and angry. Everyone has the right to feel safe and to tell someone when they feel unsafe. Everyone has the right to be listened to and to get help with bullying. To help you to feel safe, you could tell someone. How do we know who to tell? Someone who will listen, someone who makes time, someone who can do something, someone who will believe you, someone who can help you feel safe. You might choose a particular person because you've talked with them before and they've been helpful. Or you might have seen them help other people and you trust them. If you're not sure about someone, you could say, I've got a friend who is being bullied. What do you think they could do? Then see what they say. This might be your mum, dad, or the sister or brother, someone at school, grandparent, a friend or a friend's parent, or a neighbour. Sometimes it's helpful to talk with a teddy or a pet. Or you can phone Childline or 999 if it's an emergency. Who would you choose? If you're being bullied, it's important to tell someone. You have the right to feel safe, the right to tell someone, and the right to be listened to. It's really important to keep trying until someone listens to you and helps you feel safe.
All 3 animations are now complete, and it's only the one at the moment that we've uploaded to YouTube, so that animation is freely available on YouTube. And the reason for this is because of the sensitivity associated with the domestic abuse and sexual abuse animations, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. First, I'd like to tell you about the piloting that we did of these animations with children and with professionals. So I piloted the animations with 2 groups of children in 2 Leeds schools. These children were aged 7 to 13, and they filled in a questionnaire for me and also took part in a 30-minute focus group. And Dave and Fiona worked with 40 professionals in their workshops, in their protective behaviour workshops, finding out from professionals what they would need to use them and what their experience was of viewing them too. In terms of the children, they were really, they found the animations really helpful. Many of them thought that they would recommend them to others as well if they had a problem. In particular, there were 4 key themes that emerged from the pilot group work. Children appreciated that the animations made suggestions to them for what to do, but also who to tell, gave them a few more ideas about people outside those close relationships they might have in their family. They also found the style something that they could relate to, with it being a cartoon, and it was accessible. It used words that they understood. They also presented them, they said, with clear and memorable messages, things that they could remember about what to do or who to tell. And also, it provided them with a vocabulary for seeking help. These aren't the children's words, these are my words, but I'd like to show you some of the things that children said about the animations. As I mentioned, they said things like, it tells you options of what you can do, and gave ideas of who to talk to in these situations. And that they liked that it puts it in a child's perspective, that children would want to watch it because it's a cartoon, and it doesn't use complicated words. Also, and quite important, I think, here, if you look at the second quote, one child picked up in particular on this idea that if you don't want to tell someone that you're having a problem yourself, you can say that a friend of yours is having this problem. And here they say that this is important because you might not feel brave enough to tell someone that it's you. And this can help to build your confidence. I think this is a really important finding that I've noticed across the work that I've been doing with children, that children don't always have the confidence and don't always feel brave enough to talk to an adult. And this is something we hope to tackle with the animation, to try and get children to feel confident and to have the words to do that. I'd like now to, oh sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. In piloting the work with professionals, Dave and Fiona found that many of the professionals found the resources really engaging and really different from things that they were generally using in their work. So many of them were using paper resources rather than digital animation in their safeguarding work. So they really appreciated that they had a different option, but in particular for issues like domestic abuse and child sex abuse, where there aren't very many resources available to work with children because of the sensitivity around it. And we've also had contact with a local Leeds-based domestic abuse charity behind closed doors who are interested in using these animations in their educational work with local Leeds schools. One of the things that they said, alongside the professionals that Dave and Fiona were working with, was that they'd like scaffolding materials to support these animations. They'd like some resources, some booklets or leaflets that help them think about questions and which guide their discussion in an informative but sensitive way around these quite difficult issues. And that's something we're responding to by developing these resources this year after the project is finished. And this is why we've held back on uploading these animations to YouTube just yet. But it's our intention that by the summer they'll all be up there and that we'll have some resources which we can signal to people. Here are some resources you can use to accompany those animations. The materials or the resources that would go alongside the animations also allow us to think about who else might be the subject of abuse. You won't know this, but all of the animations we've developed have a girl as the subject of abuse, and one of the reasons for that is because we had a limited budget and we could only afford one actor and one voiceover. But of course, boys are victims of abuse too, and the perpetrator isn't always a male. And so the resources allow us to explore these issues with children and talk about who else might be involved in these kinds of situations. I'd like now to offer some reflections on my collaboration with Families Feeling Safe. And I'm not saying this just because this is an event like this. They're not here, so they wouldn't know. But my experience working with them has been overwhelmingly positive. One of the explanations I'd give for this is that we had a shared philosophy about how to work with children. We had a sense that children should have a voice, but often are marginalised by more powerful others. That they are also rights holders and they have a right to protection, a right to feel safe, but they also don't always know about this right to feel safe. We also shared a value around how we should work with children and families and the difficulties that some families might have in keeping children and young people safe, particularly if they're not safe themselves. And this underpinned our work. And lastly, we had a commitment to tackling abuse because professionally, each of us had experienced children and encountered children who'd experienced abuse, and we wanted to do something to support those children in getting help and support other children in their situation as well. Of course, this collaboration wasn't without its difficulties. One of the issues that we faced was that we had a huge learning curve of becoming animators, developing animation, something which none of us had done before. And that was really quite difficult. But we were fortunate enough to work with some very professional organisations, Limehouse, who organised the whole process, and Fettel, who were the animators, who guided us up the steep mountain, if you like. And secondly, and this is perhaps something I hadn't really anticipated, perhaps naively, but in producing a tangible product with an external organisation like Families Feeling Safe, we had to think about whose intellectual property this was. And whilst it could have been a tug of war, it certainly wasn't. We did have to draw up legal contracts and sometimes deal with quite baffling legal terminology. Again, we were given quite a lot of support from the university in how to interpret this. My understanding was that if we were developing a commercial product which we were trying to sell, this would have been a lot more complicated, but due to our altruism, then fortunately we had quite a simple legal contract. And just some final thoughts. Working with Fiona and Dave at Families Feeling Safe and having the opportunity through the funding from the Leeds Social Sciences Institute Impact Acceleration Account, I was enabled to realise some of the impacts, I suppose, of my research, some of the real-life applications of my research. And for Families Feeling Safe, they've told me that this has added to their evidence-based professional practice, something which is really important to them. It's also given all three of us an opportunity to work on a really novel and worthwhile project and to try and contribute to perhaps the development of safeguarding practice in developing animations for a digital world. And I hope that many people will benefit from this, professionals and children, both here in Leeds and beyond. Thanks. There are some differences in gender in how children respond to these issues. Boys are perhaps taking a more physical approach to things sometimes, so their response to a domestic abuse situation, at least in my research, which was a small-scale qualitative project, was quite a physical one, that they might do something physical towards that person or try and remove the people that they love from that situation, whereas girls were more likely to be fearful. And I think we might expect these to be the findings. In terms of who the children would tell about issues, I think boys were probably more likely to not really talk to anyone. Girls more likely to tell parents and grandparents and have a more sort of openly, emotionally disclosing relationship, which we know from other research as well. But boys have perhaps a more physical way of dealing with things, and perhaps avoidance tactics as well came in quite strongly there, that children sometimes, one way in which they would deal with an issue would be to avoid the situation rather than to address it and tell someone else. That's a really interesting question, and if anyone has any suggestions for how we can do that, then I would very much like to hear. Of course, we can see how many people have watched the animations. What is much more difficult to know about is the impact, the real impact, whether children have disclosed a situation of abuse because of the animations. I think what we can do is use professionals, I don't mean, perhaps use is the wrong words, but we can work with professionals in both Families Feeling Safe work, but also behind closed doors, and talk to them about the impact that it's having on children and whether or not children have learnt something through watching these animations. And that might involve working with children in an educational programme, for example, of 6 or 8 weeks, and finding out what they think about what they would do in these situations beforehand, and then after that programme of work, finding out where they are at that point as well. Of course, we'll never know whether they will act on the knowledge that they've gained from the animations, but knowledge is power, isn't it? So knowing something is the first step.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for asking us to come and talk about our project. So I'm Christina Leston-Bender, and the accent was very good, thank you. I'm a professor of politics at the School of Politics and International Studies, and Kate Anderson here with me. She's our external partner, and she works in the Petitions Committee. She's an official of Parliament. And our presentation actually, I think, complements the other two really well, because it's about working with an institution which is about the elite decision-making process. But on the other hand, we're going to focus on a very specific project, which the last presentation was very much about showing how that specific project can work through. And as I was listening to the first presentation, I also thought that actually this project, which is funded by an IAA fellowship, it derives from a commission that I was part of. So at the beginning, when we heard about the Leeds Climate Change Commission, I was part of the Digital Democracy Commission set up by the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, and it's this whole project, the whole idea and the strengthening of the Petitions Committee and of the precision of that derives exactly from my role in that commission, which again is it's another indicator to show that impact, it's never like one finite project. It's actually something that is ongoing and there's a continuous flow into something else. And that, when that's happening, actually, I think that it shows that the impact is working well. There's a need for that, the research is well embedded, and the collaboration works well. So we're going to talk about the specific project. And so I was just going to outline what the issue was, what the problem was, and then we're going to specifically talk about how we went about implementing this IAA funding, or what the IAA funding was used for. And Kate will talk very much about sort of the follow-up, the impact, let's say, of how that work has been used by the committee, being that this is still ongoing. So what was the issue? The issue was there was a new petitions committee set up in 2015, and you may have seen that green symbol. Has anyone seen that green symbol popping up on your Facebook account or something like that? And quite likely, quite a few of you already in this room have clicked on the petition that comes from this system. There's been many petition systems out there. There's change.org, there's all sorts of things. But this is a new system which is collaborative between government and parliament since 2015. And you create a petition online, you sign it online, and then if it gets 10,000 signatures, the government responds to it. It has to respond to it, and they do respond to it, because I've counted them, and they do. And if you get 100,000 signatures, then the Petitions Committee, this group of 11 people who are part of the committee, decide whether they consider whether they should be debated in Parliament or not. And the reality is actually that most of the ones who get 100,000 signatures are debated in Parliament. Again, I have counted them. I can tell exactly the ones that haven't been debated is because there's just been a debate like 2 weeks before on the same issue or that sort of thing. And to give you a sense of scale of how this has really stepped up. So I mentioned to you the Digital Democracy Commission at the beginning. That took place 2014-15, and it was one of the things that strengthened the launch of the petition system and the e-petitions. And in the Parliament, between 2015 and 2017, nearly 11,000 petitions were submitted and accepted, so considered by Parliament. Out of those, you have quite a few who've had more than 2 million, 1 million signatures. Out of those, you've had, as I said, about 50 with over 100,000 signatures. But also, more importantly, 14 million people have signed one of these petitions, just less than 2 years. And this is unique signatures, it's not repeat signatures. So it's a system that's been used very, very considerably, and it's really took off very, very quickly. From day one, in fact, we're looking at how it went. But the whole issue is it actually developing public engagement? Is it actually developing engagement with Parliament? So are people just clicking on it, but actually nothing else is happening? And when they click on it, and maybe there is a debate, how do they feel about it? But also, more importantly, how can this committee, this group of MPs and Parliament themselves, harness that connection that people may have of that, how strongly they feel about the specific issue, whether that specific issue is about brain tumour research or about the rights of disabled people not being bullied online, as one of the inquiries they're doing at the moment. So to what extent is that transformed into engagement? And so my fellowship, my specific work we're talking about in here now, was about exploring that issue. Is it a new style of public engagement? And when this committee was created, the leader of the House, at the time William Hague, where's he gone now? He is in the Lords, yes. At the time said that having this committee who would actually look at the petitions would be a catalyst for change, a new relationship between Parliament and citizens, which, by the way, is exactly that my area of research has been for a while. So, in that context, very much working with the committee, so very much developing an idea of how, so being that this is my area of research, and being that I knew the team from the start and was thinking about how we could do things together, very much in the style of co-production, we talked about how could I help, how could my research be helpful in terms of developing that style of public engagement. And through that, that's how I got to the IAA, the Impact Acceleration Account, and the Knowledge Exchange Fellowship. And that Knowledge Exchange Fellowship, it funded for me to spend 1 day a week last year, more or less from October 2016 to May 2017, spend a day each week, every Tuesday, because it's a day that the Petitions Committee meets, with Kate's lovely team. So with the clerk and second clerk and all the officials. And the photo you see there, it's basically that room where I would go and spend a day with them before you moved because of Big Ben, because of the works on the Big Ben. And I put there the dates between October 2016 and May because that matches basically my teaching day, so it paid for one day of my time here to go to Westminster instead, and it paid for the travel. In reality, as it will become clearer in a little bit, that work is actually ongoing, so it didn't stop in May. We're still very much in touch. Just last Friday, the clerk of the committee was here. A few weeks before, I'd met with her. I'm constantly in conversations with Kate. So the work does carry on. It's just that that's the funding period for that one day a week. And during that day, I had the pleasure of sharing the day with the Petitions Committee, and I went to all the public and private meetings. And of course, that gives you access to a group of people, an environment that you wouldn't necessarily have, and to discussions that you wouldn't necessarily listen to in an environment where, because you're there every single Tuesday, you just become part of the team. It's a little bit like participant observation, really. But during that period, I did 55 observations of different scenarios, meetings, debates, oral evidence. I also interviewed staff, MPs, petitioners, very important, talking to petitioners about the experiences of the process. And Liz at the beginning talked about interdisciplinary research. I did quite a bit of research with a colleague of mine who works on computational social science data. And so we analysed also the e-petitions data, which is very rich data. And we also analysed Twitter data from petition debates, or how people are reacting on Twitter to those debates. So a lot of research happening in there, besides the collaboration, the talking with the committee. And so in terms of outputs, the main output is a copy of what you have in there. It's a report. So I did a report at the end of the session, at the end of my funding, to the committee. And in that committee, it outlines 5 overarching recommendations and then 39 specific recommendations, which would be discussed by the committee. However, if you work in politics, you know that stuff happens. And on the 18th of April, Theresa May decided to call an election. And so my report, which was going to be discussed by the committee one week later, never happened because there was no committee to discuss it. And that's one of the challenges in working in this area, that things happen and you just have to adapt. And obviously, after the elections, there were new MPs, a new committee, new people, and we're still going through that process. However, behind the committee, there's the actual staff, the staff working through all this work. And so I've carried on working with the staff, and I will still be going to the committee itself, to the members. And a number of outputs have happened. I've done an infographic, which is that, unfortunately, I didn't bring copies. Hayley was a really good idea to bring copies. I didn't bring copies of mine. But if anyone wants copies of my infographics, I've got quite a few I could give, which I work with a company who does infographics to explain what my research was about. And I've used this with other parliaments. So other parliaments have been very interested in what I've been doing. Just on Monday, I was in the Scottish Parliament talking to the Petitions Committee. And then one of the things I really enjoyed doing was that ESRC Festival of Social Sciences, where we did a workshop, actually with Kate, both of us did a workshop with local voluntary organisations. We worked with Voluntary Action Leeds, I think, and it was a workshop about what petitions can do for you, how can you campaign. And in fact, I would say if any organisations here would like us to come and do the workshop that we did, I would love to hear from you, because I really, really enjoyed doing that, and the feedback was really good, showing that it was a useful thing to do. I'm also involved in the MOOC the Parliament did about petitions, online education, an online course. But more importantly, really, it's the report that is about working, carry on that work with the committee and see where can that lead. And the fact that it's something that doesn't stop just there with the production of, in fact, that's just the beginning of a conversation. And so Kate is going to talk a little bit now about where that's led us to and some of the challenges also involved with that, but also with some of the benefits. Do you want me to put on more? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah?
Yes. Hi there, I'm Kate. I'm one of the staff of the Petitions Committee. First thing I want to say was the House of Commons works with a lot of academics, usually in two ways. One, either as people helping us investigate policy, and at the moment I've just checked, we have 33 different investigations open, so there's probably someone whose research is relevant, but also with people like Christina, sort of almost acting as a critical friend to us and telling us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And I wanted to go through why we like, as an institution, work with academics and bring in specific examples of where Christina's work has been able to have an impact with us. Now, the first point is ethics and trust. Petitions, we do have very rich data. I think the Hansard Society have said, I think a fifth of the UK population have signed or started one of our petitions. So we know quite a lot about the British public, and we are quite careful and protective of our data and our petitioners. So we turn down a lot of requests for people who want to work with us, but we've always been very happy to work with academics because we know there's ethics committees behind them and we know we can trust them. And this was great for working with Christina because it meant we were able to be completely open and honest. We had very free and frank conversations in front of her about both what was going on with petitions, but also our members, which can be quite politically sensitive. But it also meant that we were happy for her to go out and talk to petitioners. And so she was able to have conversations with them that we couldn't have. So I think one of the quotes that came out of her final report was, it's dangerously easy to set up a petition, which was really interesting for us to hear. And what we've done with that information is we've gone back, it's a jointly owned system between Parliament and government own the website, is we've been able to kind of talk to the people on the website and say, it's dangerously easy to set up a petition. How do we respond to that? And we've realised that the government digital service, they take user need first, which is great, as long as you've correctly identified the need. And it's quite clear that when the site was set up, the need was people need to start a petition. Whereas looking at Christina's research, both in the conversations that she's had with petitioners, but also the data she's collected on rejected petitions, what people actually need to do is set up a petition that the committee can accept onto the site, which is a different need. And Christina's research has enabled us to look at that in more detail and hopefully make genuine improvements to the site. An outside expert perspective. I think the great thing about working with academics, particularly if they already understand Parliament, is they're people who understand us, but they're not of us. So they can take a very different perspective to our work. And again, one of the things that Christina's research showed us is that we were concentrating very much on what we could do, the changes that we could make, which was often about things in Parliament, things to do with communications and engagement. But looking at the report and the recommendations, it was quite clear that that was actually our bias. It didn't reflect what needed to be done to kind of achieve our aim of really enhancing the relationship between Parliament and the public. Again, we need to sort of shift our focus onto how can we improve the IT side, how can we improve the digital side. And that's been a really interesting challenge for us, which we're still working through. Yeah, a catalyst for change. It's really difficult when someone hands you a report saying, here's how to make things better, to turn around and say, oh, actually, we don't have time. So it's been really good for us to have this in black and white, set out in a way that sort of broadly makes sense, that we can then examine and go through to say, okay, we need to actually, we shouldn't put this off again. We've got this amazing research, this amazing amount of information. Let's see what we can do with it now. And that helps both in terms of focusing our own minds, because we don't have to worry too much about all these kind of ideas we've got floating around in the back of our heads about how to improve things. We've got something solid. But also it helps us get institutional buy-in to get resources for change, which I'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, say the things we can't. I think there's politics in all organisations. In the House of Commons, that can be ramped up slightly. So this applies in two ways. One, as officials of the House of Commons, there's certain things which it's culturally inappropriate for us to say to members of Parliament. Christina, on the other hand, and academics are able to say, actually, we think you should change the way that you talk to petitioners. We think you should think differently about the way you introduce debates to make sure the voice of petitioners is fully heard in those debates. And Christina's report is able to have us to start those conversations, which is something we couldn't have done otherwise. On the alternative side, on the sort of the institutional side of the politics, there were decisions which were made when the site was set up in 2015, and they were institutional decisions about how things run in Parliament. And it's quite difficult for us to revisit those decisions. But with kind of an outside perspective, which has the word professor in it, it makes it much easier to go to senior leaders in the House of Commons and say, actually, maybe we should rethink whether the decisions made in 2015 are still the right decisions in 2018. And that's particularly around the way that the general election led to the closure of the petition site. All the petitions essentially ended because Theresa May called an election. And do we need to revisit whether or not there are procedural ways that we can allow petitions to carry over to the next election? Difficult, but might be able to. Yeah, credibility and influence. As an institution, we love academics. And it feels like it doesn't matter how much kind of experience we have within the organisation. If we have someone with a doctorate coming along and saying, we think you should do this, suddenly the sense of what we can do and what we can get resources to do increases dramatically. So for us, this means that we've been able to use the evidence Christina collated to create a business case to get more resources for the committee, so we can really, again, start to fulfil the idea of connecting Parliament with the people. As part of the system, we can email petitioners about topics in Parliament to do with their petition. So that could be debates, but it could also be select committee inquiries. And as a result of us being able to do this, so a recent example would be the work and pensions inquiry into PIP, a disability living allowance, which led to the largest, because we emailed the petitioners who had started a petition about that, almost 100,000 people, they've led to the largest number of select committee responses ever in inquiry. They're actually now producing 2 reports, one of which will be entirely made up of responses to the select committee inquiry, which is a direct result of our emails to petitioners. The evidence that Christina has found has meant that we can make the business case for having someone to do that more. So we can really start to fulfill this idea that we could genuinely email 10 million people every 6 months about specific work in Parliament which they care about, which could have a transformative effect on our relationship with the public. This is the thing that's really hard for us to consider. I think Christina mentioned there was 53 recommendations in the report.
39.
39, okay, sorry, I've miscounted. 39 recommendations in the report. And it's not that we would necessarily want to go ahead with all of them, although they're all kind of food for thought, if that makes sense. There are some that we've looked at and thought, actually, we disagree with the recommendation, but there's definitely a correctly identified problem which we then need to go away and consider. But being presented with this massive information without being very clear, well, how do we in our full-time job make the time to make the changes has been a big challenge, which is one of the reasons why, as Christina said, it's not just about the production of a report, it's potentially years of extra work going on. We will shortly be running a committee inquiry into the committee, and Christina's report will certainly feed into that. Thank you. Did I forget anything?
No, I think you covered it all. No, I think that was it then. So, anyone's got any questions? No? There's whole papers written about that. So there's lots of ways of looking at it. I would say that successful would depend on the outputs it achieves. The outputs can be many. So the outputs might be raising awareness of an issue that members were not aware of. And then on the other side of that output, you might say it's a change of policy. And one of the things that the research does and that my research has been trying to show is that outputs are not necessarily about tangible outputs. They're not just about changing policy. There's many different things you need to do until ultimately you change policy. And actually sometimes raising awareness of an issue is as important as changing the policy because members, representatives, government might not be aware of the issue. So petitions, they perform a variety of roles. One of them is a fire alarm role, which is about bringing issues to the members that they might not be aware of. I'll give you an example of the high heels one, for instance. I mean, we could use quite a few, but there was a petition of this young lady who was basically sacked because she wouldn't wear high heels for her work because she was told by her boss that she should do. And actually, when I saw that petition coming through, I thought, you know, that's just a silly thing. It's not really an important thing. Well, it went to 100,000 signatures in no time whatsoever, and actually showed that it is an issue that is a very valid issue, real issue in a variety of professions. It tends to be mainly in terms of temporary jobs, you know, more vulnerable jobs, and it's not necessarily an issue that members were all aware of. And it also brought issues to do with that, with, you know, employment tribunal fees and a variety of things. So in there, I would say that it is a successful petition because it raises awareness and it has actually led them to other things in terms of how employment tribunals fees are dealt with. You don't say something about that?
Yeah, just on that one, because it sounds like it was just about high heels. But
yeah,
I think as part of the petitions committee, we do a lot of public engagement. And on that, we kind of put out, well, why are people signing this? And we found some really genuinely shocking evidence, not just about women being sort of forced to wear sexualised uniforms, but also some particular things. So, for example, about black women's hair, and the way that some employers had written down policies that women had to chemically relax their hair. So it turned into quite a major policy issue. Mm-hmm. As a result of that, the government promised to rewrite the guidance to make sure there was a full publicity campaign around it. Then the general election was called. But the committee is still picking that up and going back to the government to make sure the promises they made now last year continue to happen. We can keep talking about lots of different examples of petitions which have had genuine, real policy changes. But if there are any, which we can chat about, or if there are any other questions. If the question is, tell us a petition that's had policy change, I can keep going. But,
yes, definitely. I mean, I've been working with Parliament for quite a few years now, so I know the institution really well, I'd say. But working with the Petitions Committee and being there one day a week is definitely given me a very different perception of the institution. And it also has led to many other projects, not just my own projects actually, but it's led more to me getting other people involved with Parliament, actually, if anything, and to enlarge more of those projects. I'll give you, it might seem a very silly example and completely different, but actually just now I had an edited book published about exploring Parliament, which is about introducing Parliament to publics who don't know about Parliament. And in that book, it's a book made between practitioners, so clerks, officials, and academics, nearly 60 authors. And it's a massive endeavour. To do that, definitely the knowledge I acquired working with the committee was really helpful to be able to make something like that actually being published now and becoming probably a quite important resource for Parliament. So, yeah, definitely. It's definitely a two-way. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly different thing. I just wanted to mention we've done a big research project in Parliament into REF 2014 and where academics have demonstrated impact in Parliament. So we do have some very good data about where academics have been which parts of Parliament academics have contacted and have then go on to be able to demonstrate impact, which I'd be happy to talk to anyone about if you grab me in the break.
It's online, by the way. It's available. There's a few blog posts about that online.
So our idea for these showcases, and we have actually a lot more of them, and you'll be able to, I don't know whether you've got this in your pack, but certainly there are these brochures available which talk more about some of the other case studies that we've just produced. So this is a sort of preliminary for you to be working in groups after the break in order to think about some of the issues around our impact acceleration account and exploring how you might get more involved in that. In fact, we initially thought that we only had funding until 2017, but in fact we've now extended that funding till March 2019. So there's plenty of opportunities for you to develop your own impact acceleration case studies and to apply to LSSI for those. And so that's what we're going to be trying to look at a little bit more in the breakout groups. We've essentially got 4 different groups, and you've either signed up to them in advance, or if you didn't do that, you've been pre-allocated to them. And in the back of your pamphlet, you will find that there's a list of delegates, and in the first column, you've got a letter in front of your name, and that is the group that you are in, and then each one of them is signposted. There's 4 of them, A, B, C, D, I think, is the way that it goes. First of all, we'll have a break, so you've got time to familiarise yourself with where you're supposed to be. 15 minutes. I think it doesn't look like coffee's here yet. It's on its way. Okay, it's just here. That's fantastic. Yeah, so 15 minutes. If we can come back on time, that's great. Each of the groups has got a facilitator and a note taker, so you basically be working together with those people. So thanks very much. Now over to you, basically.